Next up, Charbel, Awad. Well done. And I'm sure you can do better than me standing here. Alors, the topic being climate change mitigation. Bienvenue.
And we start with the typo on changement. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. My name is Charbel Awad. Good job on the pronunciation of my name. I used to play high school basketball, and I think the worst pronunciation was in St. John. On the flyer, I was Chapel Swad. So I was a church. So welcome everyone, and thank you for the invitation, Pierre, today to talk about climate change. There's three main points I want to cover today, and a prelude in regards to just an introduction of myself. So I'm the new Acting Deputy Minister of the Department of Environment and Local Government. I've been in place since early July, and it's been quite the whirlwind. So the department has merged from two departments into one. It used to be Department of Environment, Department of Local Government. The merger's in one, but we still have two ministers. So we still reference the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Local Government, but there's still just one department and one large team supporting both of them. So a little bit about my background as to how I got here. I'm originally from Campbellton, born a Francophone, only learned English in grade 3, switched schools in grade 9 to play basketball, went to UNB for my degree, and it's terrifying how quickly you can lose your French. We don't live in a French environment and surrounded by French. So any opportunities I have to speak with any of you in French, please be patient with me as I speak in French, because I would rather practice my French and just pivot to English. So for my career, I actually started with a computer science degree. I know, I don't know how I got here. So I started with government in 2002 with Justice and Public Safety as a programmer. And I was designing court case management systems. And from there, I became a systems architect, designing larger, intricate enterprise-level computer systems. Did that for about 10 years to about 2012, and it kind of got old. The solutions were predictable. The problems were familiar. I wasn't feeling challenged anymore. So I got a degree, or not really a degree, I got certified in Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, and started doing the whole performance excellence stuff for a number of years. I was doing pretty good at it. And then so much so that they appointed me Director of Sheriff Services to see what someone with a background in efficiencies can do with Sheriff Services. I knew nothing of peace officers or enforcement or security. So that was a lot of fun. I learned an awful lot through the sheriffs, and from within 2 years, I got promoted to chief sheriff to run the organization as a whole. So I really felt blessed in regards to working with them, dealing with their challenges, and seeing how in the back office theory of how something should work doesn't work in practice. You really have to be out in the field and see the interactions with people to understand how you need to pivot with the circumstances and just talk to people. The biggest lesson I learned from sheriffs is you can't order someone to do something and expect compliance. You need to be able to listen, know where they're coming from, what their issues are, de-escalate, and work together. And I've actually applied that to my lessons going forward with dealing with the judges, which I'll get to that in a minute. So chief sheriff, then I got executive director of court services, then ADM of justice services. I was responsible to work with the judiciary. I'm so happy to work with mayors now. It is so much less stressful than working with judges. And in 2021, I was senior ADM of justice and of legal services. So I was responsible for all the lawyers in government. That was an experience. So, and I'm not a lawyer, but I may come across as talking as one, and please tell me with no hesitation. I have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. So, as of July, I'm acting deputy of environment and local government, breaking all those experiences forward to work with all of you in regards to your challenges and hoping to work together towards common solutions on issues. This isn't two groups working in conflict with one another. It's two groups wanting to go in the same direction that need to understand where we're each coming from in order to, circumvent or work our way through some of these challenges. And I'll touch really briefly on local governments reform. We met with l'Association des Municipalités Francophones on Wednesday, and they made a really good point that we keep talking about governments reform as if it was just one thing, but local governments reform is actually two major reforms. It was the RSCs and it was the municipalities. And we're in the middle of all of that change, trying to figure out where the lanes are and how it all works. It is a challenge. So I think the minister spoke a little bit this morning about slowing down a little bit, listening a little bit more, and working together to better position ourselves for the upcoming challenges. So the department's full support of taking that approach. Okay, that was my brief intro. Today I'm here to talk to you about climate change. And the three main points I want to touch on is how do we experience climate change, the importance of planning, and what exactly is net zero. How do you experience climate change? So we hear that it's getting warmer, the weather is changing, but how does that actually work in practice? So a quick example I'll give you is growing up in Campbellton, it was always a 50-50 shot if there was going to be snow on Halloween, during Halloween, because we always had snow the first week in November. And we would all be skiing by December, and by midway through March, it'd be spring splash, everything is melting, the ski hill will close. Nowadays, we don't even have snow until end of December sometimes. And who knows if we're going to see spring in April or May. Like, it's really shifted. We've had some winters here in Fredericton where there was literally no snow. I think it was 97, 98. It rained more than it snowed, and there was no snow clearing. It was mainly all salt on the roads. So that is how one way that we're experiencing climate change. But the other way is, from my experiences as chief sheriff, the ice storms in the peninsula were devastating. They were lost power, the power poles were down, people didn't have electricity, we didn't have the infrastructure in place and even how to get to them. That was a big impact on those communities. Thankfully, we had Bathurst and Miramichi that were well positioned to support us when we're working in the region. But it's the same thing with the floods in Fredericton over the last few years. Well, thankfully before, not the last few years, but prior to that, 2018, 2019, it was bad in Fredericton, but if you drove out to Risha and those areas back there past Lincoln, you couldn't even get to houses. Like the roundabout route you had to go to get to someone, if there was a heart attack or someone needing emergency response, you can't get to them. That is climate change. That is how we're actually experiencing them. And that's what's putting all the pressures on their planners on, you need to grow your economy, you need to grow your population, but where are you building those houses? How's the planning taking place? Like, how is all that coming together? You need to be aware that the world we were in before is different, and it's much more difficult to plan ahead as to where things are going to go. A quick example I can give on that is in regards to land development. You can develop an area to build houses and make it resilient so that area doesn't flood. But if the water used to go there, the water needs to go somewhere else. So now the problem takes place in another area that never had water issues before. And then if you compound that across all the way along the rivers, like I'm using St. John for an example, the St. John River, same thing in Miramichi, the Restigouche and other areas, the water's got to go somewhere. There's more snow coming, and that water's being concentrated in areas that was never going before. So when it comes to a planner, it's difficult because on the permitting side over environment, local government, they're looking to build in an area that never flooded before, and now we're refusing their WAWA permits because it's now a wetland. And they're like, 5 years ago it wasn't a wetland. I agree, but the ground is changing, where the water is going. That is the challenge in planning on all of your planners now, is how do you predict where it's going? The hydrology team we have now, instead of just looking on the flooding and as to where the water goes during floods, are having to pivot to know when we have heavy rainstorms, where does it go? We saw Edmonton a few weeks ago, that road being washed out. Like, it was just a rainstorm. It wasn't a cataclysmic or a significant event. It was just a really heavy rain. And just the way the water was diverted as part of that rain had a significant impact on that road. So those are the impacts of climate change that we're all experiencing. So that's what the climate change plan is supposed to work us towards, is everybody keeps talking about reducing greenhouse gas as a solution of climate change, but it's not. It's larger than that. It's about how do we change the way we approach our challenges with a view of the impacts and consequences of those decisions that we make. And the climate action plan is really constitutes 30 actions that we've committed to within it, all of them broken down to essentially 3 pillars in regards to governance, leadership, accountability, getting the message out there and explaining to people why we're refusing permits, why we're taking a different approach on things, why it's more expensive to repair roads, why subdivisions are being, not invested in whereas others are. There's a lot going on, and the big part of it now is education for the public on it, because they don't understand what necessarily is coming their way, especially areas that have not experienced floods that may be experiencing floods in the future. The next is reducing greenhouse gas. The hope there is to not make things worse than the way they already are. And the last one is essentially preparing for climate change, mitigations, how do you adapt, and how do you respond. Now, I'll touch briefly on greenhouse gas emissions. So everybody likes to talk about targets and how we're getting to zero and what that actually means. So in the middle where the red and the yellow dot is, that's essentially where we are right now. So you see there was a dip in 2020. The fact that a lot of industries slowed down during COVID made it look like we were way ahead when it came to our greenhouse gas emissions. We were ahead of where our targets were. It bounced right back up. As soon as you fired up industry, it came right back to where we were. The trend's in the right direction. We are trending downwards, but there's some challenges on how we're going to hit those targets. And the composition of those targets is on the left. 24% of our greenhouse gas emissions is from electricity generation. 26 is transportation. 34 is industry. So buildings, agriculture, and waste also have a smaller part. But where government is focusing is the biggest bang for the buck, which is on energy generation, transportation, and industry. So that's a big drive for the whole move to EVs, electric vehicles, in regards to emissions from transportation. It's not going to get rid of all of it, but it's going to help. As a new owner of an EV, they're awesome. The conversation previously in regards to changing your driving habits, he's spot on. The regenerative driving, I think, is more applicable to someone who used to drive a standard to downshift to slow down. That's essentially what regen brakes are. And the car was listed at 510 range. I'm getting about 650 on the car just by using the regeneration. So how that actually works in practice is I went from here, did the Fundy Parkway and drove back about 420 kilometers. It cost me $5 to recharge it. So EVs are the way to go. We just need the price of the EVs to come down. Electricity. As a lot of you are aware, Belledune has a coal plant, which is closing in 2030. Which is why in 2030, 11% reduction on our total greenhouse gas on just shutting down Belledune alone. That's huge. That's a big gap in the electricity grid, so they're looking at a solution as to where they're going to make up that difference in electricity. But just Belledune shutting down puts us very near our target for 2030 alone. What we haven't added to the math, though, is what are you going to replace Belledune with? Is that going to create new greenhouse gases, and to what extent? So that's part of the equation, which brings us to net zero. So 6 weeks ago, I thought net zero meant no emissions. That's not what it is, thankfully. There is always going to be emissions. What net zero really means is your total amount of emissions is balanced out by your removal of carbon and GHGs from the air. And there are different strategies to do that. So trees naturally bring carbon out of the air. There are certain species of trees that grow faster and draw more carbon out of the air as they grow than others. So does that become part of our forestry plan in regards to the type of trees that we're planting in order to take advantage of that? So DNRED is looking at some of that, some of the strategies. There's also the idea of carbon capture in regards to capturing carbon, storing it in the ground. Sounds kind of scary because it reminds me of some Simpsons episodes where they put nuclear waste in a barrel and bury it. You know, something's going to happen, it's going to leak. But there's a lot of concerns in regards to the approach that we take on how we can capture carbon. But there's an industry there. If New Brunswick gets really good at capturing and we capture more carbon than what we're emitting, suddenly we've opened up a new market to Nova Scotia, PEI, the US, of being the ones to balance out their carbon emissions. And that becomes a new source of revenue in regards to carbon tax trading and so on. So that's an opportunity for the province because I don't know if you've noticed driving through, it's got a lot of trees. So there's good opportunities to leverage that over here. So that's essentially what I wanted to touch on today. The challenges on planning are real. The consequences of climate change we have limited control as to what's coming our way. And the scary part is, I'll touch on the St. Andrews forest fire that we had in the spring. I don't think everybody realized how close we were to that being a true disaster for the whole province because the drought index was really high. There was no water in the ground. It was springing up everywhere. And we had all our crews on St. Andrews. If we had other forest fires starting in the province, there was no help coming from Nova Scotia because they were dealing with their fire over and around Halifax, and Quebec had the majority of their crews sending over to BC and Alberta. So we were almost in a position that if that fire spread, who gets the support? Which community do we have to position ourselves to save? So these are sobering conversations that are coming our way, unfortunately, and that all has to come into your adaptability plans. A lot of you have plans that were put in place for, I say, the last few decades, and now that you've inherited new areas in your municipalities, they may not have had any, but also you may want to review them in regards to the reality of what's happened over the last few years and the new trends that you've experienced. So that's all I wanted to cover today. Merci Pierre pour l'invitation and for the opportunity to speak to you all today. If there's any questions, I welcome them to the microphone, en français ou en anglais.
Bonjour. Très belle présentation. Une petite question. Si je comprends bien, c'est l'approche que la province a déterminée pour toute la question de l'environnement et compagnie. Est-ce que cette approche-là est différente des autres provinces ou au niveau canadien, mais même au niveau international? Est-ce qu'on a fait les choses différemment ou est-ce qu'on fait les choses différemment? On est dans la même lignée que tous ces gens-là qui s'enlignent pour justement cette problématique?
C'est pas mal la même manière à travers du Canada. So, il y a vraiment un framework qui a été mis en place par ECCC, c'est quoi en français? Le département d'environnement fédéral. C'est eux autres qui ont vraiment mis un framework en place que toutes les provinces travaillent à travers pour leur approche avec. Mais pour les solutions, ça tombe vraiment dans chaque province de trouver leur propre solution de les défis qu'on a.
Donc, OK. Donc, on a innové au niveau des solutions, mais le framework est pas mal le même.
C'est ça.
OK. Merci.
Okay, merci. Any other questions?
Hey, Charbel. Thanks for that. A couple questions that are related on some of the sobering comments you've made we're all well aware of and appreciate it being reinforced. Last year we were here and we were talking to the CEO of NB Power. I don't believe I think she was the interim at the time. Lori. And we asked, is NB Power developing a EV concept or strategy for the province? And the answer was no. And we were all a bit surprised to hear that because we had all thought there's no point in us individually coming up with how to power the transition to electric vehicles independently. Unfortunately, based on that answer, I think many of the cities are right now currently undergoing EV transition plans. And so I wonder if you're tracking that. You're uniquely cited as the deputy for both now. Do you have a sense of where that's going in terms of how do we make sure that we are provincially ready for this transition to electric vehicles, or did you want the cities moving forward independently and doing our own planning and strategy development?
So the short answer is yes and no. The longer answer is the actual plan for the energy transition and for the EV grid is actually with DNR-ED. They're responsible for the energy side of the file. Environment's engaged in regards to supporting them because those moves are going to help our targets, and we have some funding available to help them encourage some of the projects they're looking at. They heard it loud and clear at public accounts, I believe 2 weeks ago, in regards to New Brunswick needs an EV charging strategy, and they are actively working on it. They're not in a position to announce the strategy at this time.
So that would be another example. I'll ask you to put your other hat on as local government. Is it shocks me that I'm not aware that plan is being developed and that my staff wouldn't have been part of that plan development.
Yeah, so let me qualify what I mean by them working on a plan. They know that there's a need and there's a gap. They're having conversations amongst themselves as to how they engage to address that issue. They are not working on a solution. They're looking at a way to engage and evaluate an approach that they may consider to take.
Okay. No, I appreciate that, and I think what you'll hear from us as your cities, your engines, is we're desperate to be involved. authentically. We have a lot of capacity and a lot of really bright people working on these files, and we would just like to be part of it. We've all experienced over the last couple of years a number of shocking regulations come forward on things that are great that we'd also been concurrently working on independently, unknowing that they were being worked on by our colleagues of the province. So I think anything you can do in your role to partner up some of those big files and encourage your colleagues across government to ask for some inputs if the municipalities want to provide it would be appreciated. So
Certainly.
I'll take that in. The other question I would have in terms of some of this stuff, do you have any indication as to what the province intent on building code is right now? We're still on the 2015 building code, and some of your targets might be easier met with a change to the most current building code, albeit the trade-off of it's going to drive costs in housing, which is the other side of a dangerous sword.
Correct. So I'd have to check with my colleagues of public safety, because I remember we took a lot of flack as a department in JPS over the last year because we were introducing new building codes that were driving up costs. I just don't know if they're actually in place or not yet. So
Okay.
I'd have to follow up
No,
on
they
that.
did. They moved us to 2015, which is still
Okay.
5 years behind the most current national ones.
Okay. So beyond that, I'm not privy to any further conversations on that
Okay.
file.
And the last comment I would make as cities is one of the things that we all have our net zero and emission plans in, and I would love the opportunity to contemplate, like I believe urban areas are where people live, and they're going to create emissions. And the ability to trade off our emission footprint with the rural areas, if we could start incentivizing urbanization and reducing sprawl or rural development, the opportunities to say, you know what, City of St. John, you're going to make emissions, and we know that because you have 100,000 people living there. But in the rural areas, you're going to offset those. And right now, we haven't had any of those discussions. And I would just put it on your radar that as we get closer and closer to 2050, seems like a long ways away, but I think time's going to fly. We should probably start contemplating models that allow for that.
It is, and the gap for us to be able to engage in those conversations are what are the mitigations you could put in place to take carbon out of the air so you know what you're actually looking at implementing as your
Right.
counterbalance.
Yeah. Thanks, Charbel.
Thank you for the questions. Brent?
Good morning. Thanks for coming, Charbel. Yeah, just a few things. I guess, from our perspective in St. John, we have a climate change action plan we completed, and we're strategically moving forward the implementation of that. We're a coastal community. The risk is significant, like we saw with Hurricane Lee, which fortunately went out towards Nova Scotia last weekend. But we do have low-lying areas. We have key infrastructure, wastewater lagoons, downtown our waterfront, seawalls, all those sorts of things, very expensive infrastructure. So there is the federal Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, the DMAF fund, and we've been applying for and have been successful in that. But we haven't seen the support at the provincial level in terms of supporting the implementation of our action plans. So, we were able to get some funding, I think it was through FCM, to actually undertake that climate change action plan. But the implementation of it is very expensive, it's infrastructure heavy. And so that's something that we would advocate for. What is the role of the province in supporting municipalities to fund climate change, infrastructure, adaptation, and mitigation efforts?
Okay. I just made a note. I'll have to go back to the team and discuss that with them.
Okay. And then, something else is just around, we're interested in, because civil infrastructure is incredibly expensive and has gotten incredibly more expensive in just the past 2 or 3 years. And so, interestingly, the federal government came out with the Natural Infrastructure Fund, which we thought is quite interesting. And it's really about looking at natural means to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So we're not just tearing up streets and trying to put bigger pipes in the ground, but we're really looking at the upstream mitigation efforts, whether it's stormwater detention ponds or retention, planting of trees in a municipality, trying to reduce the impacts through less costly, more natural solutions. But I've not seen that initiative at the provincial level as well, and it's something we're interested in, because trying to make best use of taxpayer dollars, we think there's an avenue there.
Points are well taken, and also it's cheaper to invest now than to fix later. So, thanks.
Bonjour, Mélissa Jeannin de la ville de Dieppe.
Bonjour.
J'avais une question par rapport au transport. On veut réduire les émissions du côté des transports et la vision est plutôt d'aller aider à réduire les voitures. Donc, en ce moment, je pense que ce serait important de viser vers les transports en commun. Et je me demandais, du côté du financement, on voit qu'il y a du financement pour aller chercher des autobus, mais est-ce qu'on a réfléchi au niveau de la province d'aller donner du financement opérationnel pour aider justement à développer le réseau de transport en commun?
Ok, c'est une bonne question. Je n'ai pas une réponse pour vous, parce que ça tombe vraiment avec le département d'énergie. Mais j'ai des conversations avec eux autres chaque semaine, so je vais leur en discuter.
OK, merci.
Merci pour la question. If that's everything, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the questions, and these are just the starts of these conversations, so look forward to meeting with you all again. Thank you.